So I think that I have you looking at the PowerPoint slides, and you can access those PowerPoint slides from the Chapter 3 module. I think they're on the 3.3 tab and they're linked directly there. We're not going to go over every single PowerPoint because you're able to read the text, review the text, and I think some of that is fairly self-explanatory. But I do want to kind of forward through some information on forecasting. And again, I'll try to break this into at least two, maybe three smaller segments. So that being said, I hope we've kind of settled into our use of operations and supply chain management, the core and the connect access that we should be using. It looks to me like most everybody has obtained access to that. So that being said, for this particular chapter, we're going to be talking about forecasting in the supply chain. And it is broken into three segments for specific reasons. So 3A, that group of homework and those concepts are the basic forecasting fundamentals. And then 3B takes from those basic forecasting fundamentals and expands a little bit upon them. And then 3C takes from what you learn in 3B and expands upon that. So it is important that you kind of try to understand the 3A chunk and then move on to the 3B and then move on to the 3C. Okay, so in reference to the 3A, basically, we're going to be talking about forecasting, and we're going to be talking about some of the most basic types of forecasting. So forecasting is used not only in a manufacturing environment, but across a variety of functional areas. So, if you're not a logistics and supply chain areas student, this applies to you if you're in finance and accounting, right? They use it for budgeting and cost control. Probably when I was a student, I did not enjoy finance and accounting classes. However, when I was out in the working world and they were real problems, real situations, I used the forecasting and budgeting process extensively and actually really came to enjoy that. Marketing, of course, relies on forecasts to make decisions about how much new product planning they should have. And production always uses forecasts to select suppliers, determine capacity requirements. Any of you who have worked in a manufacturing environment know that having the right material on hand to produce what you need to produce is critical. Okay. And the last kind of section on here talks about different activities require different forecasting approaches. And so that some of it is just trying to give you the baseline understanding of forecasting so that you can make some decisions about what type of forecasting you need to use where. Okay. I'm going to let you read on decoupling points in the chapter and the slides, but we're going to continue on with the basic types of forecasting. So we have qualitative and we have quantitative, right? Qualitative is what you would expect. It's more verbal. It's more soft understanding of concepts. It's not a hard data approach. Quantitative, on the other hand, takes more of a hard data approach. And we're going to talk about some different qualitative techniques, but we're going to really focus in on the quantitative techniques in this chapter, right? So for quantitative, we have time series. So that says I can predict my future based on my past. So across time, there's some consistency there. Causal relationships say things like, well, when it's hotter outside, I sell more ice cream, right? And a simulation says I can kind of include different factors and simulate what those results might look like. Okay, so time series analysis is based on the idea that data relating to past demand can be used to predict future demand. Okay, in our demand, we have these components, right? And so I can promise you there'll be a question on your test about these components of demand. So let's make sure you have an understanding of them. Okay, so we have average, trend, seasonal, cyclical, random, and autocorrelation. So let's look at each of those a little bit more. Okay, So trend line is where we basically start. And pardon me while I close this out. And it's basically where we start, and it says, what's our history, right? So, and when we do time series forecasting, we're always interested in our history. And then we try to adjust for seasonality. So seasonality are things like Christmas, right? If I sell Christmas products, then I'm going to have some effects because of that. Okay, cyclical are things that maybe occur related to the economy. We have some cycles within our economy. It can be things like, you know, trying to think another good cyclical example. I'm drawing a blank at the moment, so we're just going to move on. Another expected element that may influence the final forecast, we have things like autocorrelation, which allows us to improve the forecasting accuracy. Autocorrelation just means that our forecast is tightly related to something else. And estimation of a random effect shows us to give a range of the forecast. So random effects has to do with the errors that we're going to see. Okay. All right. So given that we've got this diagram, right? And so I'm going to draw on top of it here. And let me see if I can get the color that I want to use. So basically, you can see that we have this trend line, right? And our trend line extends out through here. So if we continue time, that would be our trend line. And our trend line is just kind of the average of what's been happening across time. Okay, and then we have some seasonality that occurs, right? And you can see that sometimes we're above the trend line and sometimes we're below it. And that happens in consistent patterns. That's our seasonality, right? And then the growth says, okay, so we could have just average demand, which would be here. It would be flat. Sorry, I'm lost my pen here. So it could be flat, or it could be at this angle upwards, which is where our growth comes in. Okay, so in that diagram, you can see what we're doing is we're tracking the number of units demanded across time, right? And we have a 4-year history here. And we can see that we have both growth because our average across time is increasing, and we have seasonality because we have highs and lows. Okay. Okay, and here's just a different view of some of those types of trends that we can have. And again, I'll let you look at your text. I think we want to get kind of into the exponential smoothing in this particular recording. So we use our past to predict the future, right? And it's used, a short-term forecast is less than 3 months. Again, probably something that you'll see on the exam. It's used mainly for tactical decisions, right? So we have tactical decisions are about replenishing inventory. They're about supplies to keep on hand. And they may be about how many people we need to have in staff, right? Medium term forecasting 3 months to 2 years, right? What are we going to do in the next 6 to 18 months? And then long term is greater than 2 years. Okay. So we need to choose an appropriate forecasting model, and that depends on the horizon that we're trying to forecast, the data availability, how much accuracy is required, the size of our forecasting budget, and the availability of qualified personnel. Okay, so with that, right, here's a quick table that talks about some of the different forecasting methods and what's actually included in those forecasting methods. All right, so as an example, we can look at simple moving average. You need 6 to 12 months of historical data. Usually weekly data are used. Data pattern says if you're going to use a simple moving average, that it's stationary, that no trend or seasonality is present. And that's for a short-term forecast. Okay, so simple moving average would say, I wanna predict what my volume in February is gonna be. And I may take a 3-month simple moving average of the previous 3 months. So if I'm trying to forecast February, which would be time period 2, I'm gonna go back to time period 1, time period 0, and time period -1, right? So that's the 3 time periods before that. I guess in our case, it would be 1, 12, and 11, right? Because we have those 3 months that we're going to use, November, December, and January. We're going to average those for simple moving average to determine February. If we're determining February, if we're determining March, once February is over, then we're using December, January, February. That's that moving average. Every time we move up a month, we transition to the previous three months. A weighted moving average says, I want to put more emphasis on a particular area, okay? And simple exponential smoothing works in the same way. So a weighted moving average would say, let's go with, I'm going to predict April, just so we have simple. We've got data for January, February, and March. Okay, we take that data and we say what's happened in March is more important than what's happened in January or February. So I'm going to put a weight on the March data that says, maybe I'm going to put that as 70% of my forecast and the previous 2 months at 15% each. And that's how I'm going to calculate. So that's our weighted moving average. Simple exponential smoothing does that as well, but it goes about it in a different approach. Okay. All right. Exponential smoothing with trend. I'm going to pause for just a second. It looks like I have a couple people that may